So good evening. I'm Neil Gordon. I'm the CEO here at the Discovery Museum. And I want to welcome you to the second event of the 2022 Discovery Museum Speaker Series, which are conversations with expert voices on matters of importance to our communities. Tonight's session is The Power of Play, how to help children buffer stress and become more resilient. This is the 10th year of the series. And I'm very much looking forward to tonight's conversation. We have just a really wonderful turnout, and I want to thank you all for joining us. So before we get started, I do have a bit of housekeeping to go through. We'll be reserving some time at the end for a live Q&A session. So you can submit your questions anytime during the talk using the Q&A button, and we'll be able to address as many of those as we can at the end. If you have any technical questions, you can use the chat button to reach the hosts of tonight's session. Tonight's presentation will be closed caption, and that's a feature that you can turn on or off at the bottom of your screen. We will be recording tonight's presentation, and for those who are registrants, we will be sending a link as soon as it's available. So now, just before we get around to introducing Dr. Yogman, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors and tell you a bit about the Discovery Museum. So I want to thank the organizations whose sponsorship of this series sorry, one second. Sorry. I want to thank the sponsors of the series who have made it possible for us to present it free of charge for 10 years. And I wanted to invite two of our sponsors to be highlighted tonight in appreciation of their support. Our lead sponsor, once again this year, is the Foundation for Metro West, a community foundation that strengthens and improves the quality of life for residents in our Metro West communities. Since 1995, the foundation has been providing financial and educational resources to local nonprofit organizations, sharing essential data about the region to inform decision-making, and partnering with donors to increase the impact of their giving. You can learn more about how you can partner with the foundation at foundationmetrowest.org. Our partner sponsor, Enterprise Bank, is headquartered in Lowell, Massachusetts, with 26 branch locations throughout the Merrimack Valley and north central regions of Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. They are a true community bank, leading with a deep sense of mission and purpose. Their success is consistently measured by the success of the individuals, businesses, communities they enthusiastically support. So we want to thank all of our sponsors for their support. And now I'd like to share a bit about the Discovery Museum. The Discovery Museum has been serving the children and families of Massachusetts and beyond for over 40 years. Our anniversary is being celebrated this year. We're proud of our speaker series, conversations on topics we know are important to kids and families in these complex and challenging times. We have 3 more events in this year's series on topics including how to help children understand climate change and what they can do to make a difference, understanding the role of technology in children's lives, and a fun session on the art of storytelling. Registration is now open on our website for all of these events. The Discovery Museum's 40th anniversary is no small milestone. To put it in context, when we were founded in 1982, there were fewer than 100 children's museums in this country. Now there are more than 400. Now our work was unique back then when we were founded, and it still is today. Like many children's museums, we bring experiential, play-based learning to kids and families. But the Discovery Museum also adds an overlay of the scientific method to inspire discovery and foster kids' natural curiosity And importantly, we're able to emphasize the outdoors and nature-based learning. We seek to provide a learning environment that is inspiring for kids, and then we work hard to make sure that that environment is available for every kid. We seek to be a model for parents, teachers, and for the other folks in our industry. As we celebrate 40 years, we want to look forward rather than back. What's next for the Discovery Museum? The thing that's next is getting kids prepared for the future. And that involves helping kids to be better equipped to embrace the diversity of humanity, helping kids be prepared to confront the biggest issue of their future, climate sustainability, and helping kids to learn to use their voice to stand up for themselves, stand up for truth and science, and stand up for each other. We do this all in age-appropriate ways that are good for kids and their families. And we hope to engage folks like yourselves in conversations on these important topics through this forum, our Discovery Museum Speaker Series. And so tonight, we are really pleased to welcome and excited to see Dr. Michael Yogman joining us here tonight. Michael, I hope you're there and ready to come on and join us in this conversation.
I am all set.
Great. Michael, it's great to see you, and thank you for joining us tonight. And if you can bear with me, I'm going to tell folks a little bit about you before I turn it over to you.
We go way back. Go ahead, Neil.
Right. Dr. Yogman has been in pediatric practice in Cambridge for 30 years as CEO of Yogman Pediatrics. He is also assistant professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, where he teaches and does research on the father-child relationship, developmental interventions, nutrition and behavior, playful learning, and behavioral health integration in primary care. Michael has been a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics since 1973 and one of the first pediatricians to be board certified in developmental behavioral pediatrics. Dr. Yogman has served on numerous boards, including where I know Michael from, the Boston Children's Museum, the Massachusetts American Academy of Pediatrics Child Mental Health Task Force, and the National American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Psychosocial Aspects of Child and Family Health. He's also the editor of several books and the author of many articles on the father-infant relationship, infant diet and sleep, and parent-infant play. In addition, Michael is to his numerous awards for outstanding contributions to the field. Michael has received the Outstanding Children's Museum Award on behalf of the Children's Museum of Boston, where he was at the White House in 2013 to receive that. Michael, with all that background, we could have you talk for about 5 hours tonight. We'll try to not have you go quite that long, but I want to welcome you and thank you for being with us. And we're really looking forward to the insights that you have about play.
Neil, I'm so thrilled to reconnect with you and so thrilled to celebrate what you and Marie and Karen have done with the Discovery Museum. It really has become a hidden gem in this region of the Commonwealth, and the innovation and services that you provide are really just so admirable and exciting. So I'm thrilled to celebrate this, to thank your sponsors. I'm going to talk a lot about play and joy tonight, but I think it's important to mention that it's a little bit difficult to talk about these positive things in the midst of watching the cruelty, the war crimes, the refugee crisis in Ukraine. But hopefully, what I'm going to talk about, some of the ideas about playful learning and resilience, can eventually be used to support the resilience of these children when this conflict is finally over. So without further ado, let me figure out how to share my screen. Let's see. where,
Michael, you should be able to scroll to the bottom of your screen and see a green.
oh, green,
share.
there it is. Okay, good.
Thanks.
We're good. Okay, can everybody see the slides? Will go to slideshow. Good. Very good. So we're going to talk about helping children buffer stress and become more resilient. There'll be 4 major takeaways from the talk. Can everyone hear me okay? Good.
Michael, it's Marie. I apologize. If you would just press the button in the top left corner that says from beginning, then we'll be able to see your slides a bit larger.
Good.
Thank
Any
you.
other suggestions? Does that work?
It didn't, Michael. I think as you were, go ahead, please.
Okay. Just tell me if there's anything else I should do differently. Now I need to. Okay, so there'll be 4 major points I'll make. We'll talk about the current cultural shifts, which have limited opportunities for children to play. We'll talk about the importance of play being intrinsically motivated and leading to active engagement and joyful discovery. We'll talk about how important it is for preschool curricula and for the opportunities in the Discovery Museum to facilitate learning through playful learning, not didactic instruction. And finally, we'll talk about how the stable, sensitive, nurturing relationships with parents and teachers can mitigate stress, particularly during this pandemic, enhance skills such as executive function, and promote literacy and numeracy. So, play with caregivers, peers, and teachers is brain building. We'll talk about how it enhances brain structure and function. It is not frivolous. Playful learning is a fundamental part of healthy development, and we'll talk about how it's crucial for 21st century skills such as executive function, collaboration, and innovation. And finally, play helps build the safe nurturing relationships with all caregivers that mitigate toxic stress and promote resilience. So not surprisingly, our evolutionary heritage shows that animal play really helps their survival. You couldn't tell I have a bunch of dogs of my own. The Museum of Modern Art in New York has described the century of the child, emphasizing that play is to the 21st century what work was to industrialization. It demonstrates a way of knowing, doing, and creating value. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child talk about the rights of children to engage in age-appropriate play. I think you can see the argument I'm making that this is hardly frivolous. And finally, I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. We do not stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. So that for all of us as adults, when we talk about our own resilience and our ability to avoid burnout, playing is the therapeutic message I want to convey. Now, what's happening in our current environment? I think, unfortunately, there's been a cultural shift that's emphasized an exclusive focus on academic skills, particularly after the learning loss during the pandemic. A lot of people are talking about catch up in terms of only focusing on academic catch up, instead of realizing that the playful learning and social skills and social isolation that kids have experienced is equally important. So even before the pandemic, there had been a 25% decrease in playtime over the past 25 years. 30% of kindergartners no longer have recess. Only 51% of preschoolers went outside with parents to walk or play daily. Many parents have safety concerns about outdoor play and safe neighborhood playgrounds. We'll talk a bit about media. I think one of the questions that'll come up worrying about the fact that the typical preschooler uses media 4.5 hours a day. The Head Start National Reporting System replaced the evaluation of social emotional skills with pre-literacy and pre-math skills. And parents and kids are all subject to the pressure that if you don't overschedule your child with structured enrichment activities, you're somehow missing out. And I will argue that that is a false goal. So I won't bore you with neuroanatomy, but I do want to mention that there is a lot of animal data that shows how play influences brain anatomy. Brain growth basically fosters the long-term memory and social learning, and play deprivation interferes with synaptogenesis and pruning in the prefrontal cortex. We won't go through all the genetic data here, but I think, again, I'm trying to make the argument that play is not frivolous. It really is a crucial part of our healthy development. Now, here are some of the current.
I apologize for the interruption, Dr. Yogman. Your slides are not advancing and we're not seeing them well. So would you mind pausing for just a moment? Let's troubleshoot this so that everyone can have the, we're getting the benefit of the slides that you've prepared. If you wouldn't mind trying one more time in the top left corner, where it says either from beginning or from current slide, we're seeing just a stationary view of your second slide with the small versions down the left-hand side. So we just need to get you into presentation view.
So it says I'm screen sharing. Tell me what I should do differently.
You know, I apologize to our audience if you just bear with us for one moment. I'm going to request control of your screen if
Sure.
You can grant that, and then I may be able to.
Appreciate your help.
I'm sorry again for the interruption. We should have some jaunty background music. Well, let's see if I can get this to you. And I'm not able to get control of it.
So Michael, maybe try, if you take your cursor and scroll over the slides on your screen to you're looking for your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And then in the top left, there's the red box that says file. Right below it is a icon that says from beginning. That's the
Let
one.
me stop sharing for a second.
That's a great idea, and perhaps
And see if I can get back to it, because I'm not even seeing that file button. Okay, now I'll go back to screen sharing.
I'm going to stop my video, but I'll still be with you.
Okay. Now I'll go to file, and what were you suggesting?
Right. So oops.
On the home menu, so just next to where you are, it says home. Yep.
Yeah.
And then over across to slideshow.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have.
No. Do you
this
have a
thing
little
at the
gray
top.
box?
It's blocking my ability to see that.
Do you see a little gray box that says resume slideshow? There you are.
Yes, there it is. Okay.
Try that.
Okay. Did that work?
Uh,
I did resume slideshow.
yeah, and can you at the very bottom of your screen, do you see little icons? There's the zooming in and out slider there on the bottom right, in the gray window of PowerPoint. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Go to slide, screen. Switch programs, no. Go to section, go to slide. No, that's not.
What do you see just the one slide now, or do you see your layout with all of your slides down the left?
No, I'm just seeing the one slide.
Okay. Hold on one moment.
I could click through, but
On the slideshow menu. Can you see that? Try one more thing for me, Dr. Yogman, if you would. Stop sharing.
yeah,
And then do share, but instead of just choosing your screen one will be the first one that pops up, you may have other windows that appear below it on the share. And
Yeah,
one
I
of them may show just one large PowerPoint slide. If you choose the one that just shows one large slide and share that, then we may be able to see. Haha, all right, we are in good shape. Thank you all.
good, thank you. Okay,
You're welcome.
so shall I go back to the beginning or?
I think you should just click ahead to the slide that you're on. There you go.
Okay, good. Okay, so we talked about the Museum of Modern Art. We talked about the rights of children to engage in age-appropriate play. We talked about George Bernard Shaw. We talked about the cultural shifts, really challenging play. We talked about the brain function. So now we're up to the characteristics of play, which are really critical. That we want children to be intrinsically motivated to play, for it to be child-directed, for it to be active, engaging, and meaningful, and for children to experience that kind of joyful discovery of play, and for it to be socially interactive. It's not it's not typically an isolated solitary event. There are 6 different, you can categorize play in a variety of ways. We'll talk about some of these examples. Neil highlighted the importance of outdoor play for the Discovery Museum. I think that's clearly a critical piece. I want to start with something I call attunement, which is this serve and return interaction of parents and babies at very young ages. This is some research I did. It's quite an old black and white video from 30 years ago, but it's just such a marvelous example of this serve and return verbal back and forth with a mother and baby. I'll just show you a brief clip if the video works. Well, the video may not work. Okay, well, never mind. What you would have seen if the video had worked, that it's not worth worrying about, is a baby vocalizing, a mother mimicking, the mother mimicking, and the baby vocalizing, this back and forth. And I think this serve and return interaction is one of the earliest examples of play at 2 and 3 months of age. And one thinks, it's obviously very affirming for parents when they experience it, but it's also quite important because babies are learning about the rules of turn taking, which is the basis of pragmatics and language development later on. Now, the next phase at 8 or 9 months is what we call social referencing, where the baby will crawl across this plexiglass barrier only if the mother smiles and encourages the baby to do it, but not if the mother frowns. And again, an example of this social regulation, the way parents, when they're attuned to their baby, can really encourage that kind of play. The peekaboo game is the next phase where the parents or caregivers can hide their eyes, uncover their eyes, and the baby will laugh gleefully as they develop this expectancy for when the parent is going to reappear. The nonverbal language development, when the kids begin to label emotions via words. These are all aspects of play. We talk about physical play, hide and seek, tag. We talk about pretend play, dress up and fort building. Now, this brings us to another category of play, the distinctions between direct instruction, which is kind of a major part of the K-12 experience, but I think a bit overplayed when it's begun in preschool and with young children. And I think what we want to focus on, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but some balance between free play, but especially between guided play, where both of these are directed by the child. The games are for older kids, but in guided play, there's a specific focus on playful learning. And we're going to come back to that in great detail in the rest of this talk. I don't want to ignore the importance of outdoor play and exercise. You can see the age suggestions, and all too often kids don't get this 60 minutes of activity every day, and the kind of muscle strengthening and bone strengthening activity that they need. So here are the kinds of skills that play promotes. Most important, social emotional skills, cognitive and language skills. I'm going to talk a lot about self-regulation skills that build executive function, task persistence, problem solving, resolving disputes with words, building a pro-social brain. There was a recent study just this week published comparing preschool classrooms that gave kids 10 different, a randomized comparison that gave kids 10 different tasks on alternate days to look at problem solving and task persistence. And with very dramatic improvements at the end of the study, at the end of the year, both in terms of their parents' perception of kids' behavior and of the kids' ability to solve tasks and problem solve. Now, there is one of the things that play encourages for kids is them to be able to take safe risks, to test boundaries, to act like a young scientist engaged in meaningful discovery. And that's a critical part of play. And scaffolding is the way that happens, that social skills develop in this reiterative process in which new skills are built upon previous skills and are facilitated by a supportive social environment. We talked about the way the social referencing of the child crawling across the plexiglass uses reading the parental cues and their nonverbal emotional cues to decide on what's safe and what's not safe. Guided play, we'll talk about guided play and playful learning, encourages this transition from co-regulation to self-regulation. Now, so that you realize that our future, in an IBM survey of CEOs, they talked about what they were looking for in new hires in terms of 21st century skills and the new information economy. While literacy and numeracy were important, what they really wanted and what they were looking for in their new talent search was kids that were capable of creativity, innovation, and collaboration. All skills that play encourages. And I want to emphasize that: creativity, innovation, and collaboration. You don't get that by sitting passively in a classroom asking just to memorize facts. Now, we want to talk about the challenge of the pandemic and the importance of what I'm going to call relational health, which is what we've recently written a policy statement for the Academy of Pediatrics about. Here, I think, is where play is really of crucial importance, given the mental health challenges of the pandemic and the physical and social isolation that kids have experienced. The opportunity for kids to have these safe, stable, nurturing relationships with their parents, with their caregivers, with their childcare, and even with their teachers. The best academic success is based on the kind of relationships and the quality of relationships that teachers have with students, with parents, with administrators. The mutual joy, the shared communication, these serve and return interactions. There is a wealth of data showing that when kids are exposed to trauma or adversity, this is the antidote that promotes resilience and that buffers stress. So we talk about, when we talk about the prevalence of trauma and stress in children and families, we obviously want to reduce the stress, but supporting responsive relationships are really critical to resilience. And that in part helps strengthen these core life skills, which is what I'm talking about when I talk about executive function. So play can mitigate toxic stress and promote resilience, and social play becomes especially important in this era. So in our paper, one of the recommendations that we made, and I was thrilled that the Academy supported, was that we encourage pediatricians to write a prescription for play at all well visits, to get the message to parents that play is not frivolous and that it's as important as anything you do on a daily basis. That engaging in that joyful experience and encouraging parents to do this, I think is a way, and certainly the experiences you have with your children at the Discovery Museum are ways that you can understand, with the help of the staff, what your children are learning when they're playing and how you can facilitate that in a way that is not didactic. Nobody's talking down to parents. Nobody's making them guilty. They're just providing an opportunity to become better observers and to understand the value of play in your child's life. So again, not to reiterate, but when we talk about various what are toys that enhance playful learning, you want toys and activities that provide some surprise and joy, support executive function. So peekaboo is a perfect example. None of these activities require expensive objects. Mostly you can do it all with inexpensive household objects: wooden spoons, blocks, puzzles, crayons, kids building cardboard forts. Active engagement, encouraging the exploration of math and spatial skills with construction blocks and puzzles. Iterative qualities of toys that allow new exciting challenges, experimentation, open-ended blocks. Alison Gopnik has a wonderful study that if parents gave a toy with a lot of complex opportunities, if parents demonstrated all that to the child, they quickly lost interest. If they let the child explore it on their own, they played with it much more comprehensively. We want activities to be relevant to kids' lived experience or previous knowledge, which is why wooden spoons, leftover dishes, Tupperware, while you're cooking in the kitchen, let the child play with the same objects you're using. That's meaningful. It makes it part and parcel, and it enables you to get dinner on the table at the same time. Promoting social interaction so that during pretend play with older children, board games, building forts, that children can take turns, who leads and who follows. Well, I won't belabor the pathway slide, but lots of examples. So getting back to these issues of playful learning, I want to emphasize that for preschool curricula, let's get out of the false dichotomy that it's either play or formal learning, that these executive function skills are foundational. It's the how of learning, not just the content, for kids to develop working memory, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, critical for problem solving, so they're not impulsively pushing each other on the line to put their coats on and go out for recess. The wonderful concept from Mitchell Resnick at the MIT Media Lab, who talks about cultivating the joy of learning through tinkering and collaboration. There's this marvelous group in California that talks about buddy reading, taking turns, your turn to talk and be lips, and your turn to listen and be ears. So we've now moved with my colleagues and co-authors on the play paper and some policy work at both the Brookings Institute that we're very involved with and with their Center on Universal Education and with the new 5013C called Playful Learning Landscapes. We're now looking at bringing these playful learning concepts in urban neighborhoods and marrying learning sciences with urban revitalization to create playful learning experiences, particularly for children from under-resourced communities. So again, we're talking about guided play, where there's some goals of play that the adults may create, but the play is really directed by the child. And that's what produces, and we now have a ton of data that I don't want to bore you with the research, but a ton of data with evidence that these kinds of experiences promote language, literacy, STEM, critical thinking, but most important, executive function. And that's what we're really focused on. So we wondered, and I want to give you some examples here, of whether we could infuse guided play with a learning goal into everyday spaces. Could we literally shape environments that encourage guided play? And you'll see the magic of these missed opportunities that we now can create. And if you think about it, even school-age children spend only 20% of their waking time in school. Hopefully they can spend a substantial of that 80% at the Discovery Museum. But there are other opportunities besides the museum for them to play and engage in playful learning. And that's what we're really talking about, the other 80% of opportunities for playful learning. So we're talking here about working with urban planners and architects to sit at the juncture of early education and the global cities movement. And a lot of aspects of urban planning and architecture that can go into this. When is a bench not a bench? When you think about it, what could we do with a simple bench to build in opportunities for guided play? If I had more time, I might show a video about all of this, but I think I can do it. I couldn't get the video to load, so I'll do it without the video. So this all began way back in 2010 when my colleagues created this thing called the Ultimate Block Party in Central Park in New York City. And they had 50,000 people that came out to Central Park, and over 10 million people were reached with the videos online. And what they did was just demonstrate a number of activities of playful learning. And they surveyed parent attitudes to this play learning connection afterwards and published the results. And that really started a whole new genre of focus on play. And they've worked with us at the Children's Museum in Boston, but they're working in cities all over the country and even internationally, in Venice, in Buenos Aires. And here are some good examples. So we'll talk about the supermarket study. Can the introduction of simple signs in the supermarket increase caregiver-child language interactions? So you have your child in the shopping cart while you're doing the week shopping, and you're walking around, and as opposed to worrying whether the child's going to fall out of the shopping cart or reach for the candy and put something in their mouth that they're going to choke on, and you have to do a Heimlich maneuver. Instead, we could put signs in the aisles in middle and low income area supermarkets. And I'll show you the examples in a minute. But in studies of this intervention, we've seen a 33% increase in caregiver-child language production. And people are probably quite familiar with the discrepancies in the amount of language that kids from different income backgrounds show by age 3. And we really want to reverse that discrepancy. So here's a simple intervention that showed a 33% increase in caregiver child language when the signs were up in low-income neighborhoods. And STEM signs at the Libertas Lab and the University of Pittsburgh showed a similar result. Let's go to the next slide. So here were some of the slides. As you're going to the milk counter, you can have a discussion with your child. Where does milk come from? Talk about cows, talk about goats. When you're at the vegetable counter, what's your favorite vegetable? Can you count the number of apples? All of these things are opportunities to have a conversation with your child, to encourage language, to encourage the joy of learning as you're doing your daily tasks. Bus stops, another kind of area, or T-stops, where parents are often waiting. So transforming a bus stop into a playful learning space. One of the things that our Playful Learning Landscape group has done is that every intervention, they've engaged community members, and they've engaged them as data ambassadors to collect observational data on the use and learning from the site. And again, dramatic results on increasing language. So in bus stops, what they've done is had lights at the bus stops reflecting patterns on the ground that can encourage kids to dance and to have various stepping patterns on the light patterns reflected on the ground. Again, so they're not sitting around being bored, getting in trouble. They're actually learning, and they're engaging in some physical activity, which we talked about in terms of how important that is in preventing obesity. And we'll talk about playgrounds in a minute, and how in Philadelphia, they took a playground in one of the most high-risk, low-income neighborhoods, engaged the community in designing learning activities in this playground, whether it be puzzles that you see on the bottom of this slide or pictures, but and looked at how effective this was at having parents be off their cell phones, be off social media, watching their children learning, playing, having that parent-child interaction increased, having the language increased, and particularly the spatial numeric language increased from 2% to 36%. A lot of this work has been occurring in Philadelphia, where my colleagues Kathy Hirsch-Bassick and Roberta Golnick have done this with the support of the William Penn Foundation. They've really transformed the city of Philadelphia and worked with their children's museum extensively. I want to talk more a little bit about this playground. I thought I had a better slide, but one of the things that they had on this playground was a series of patterns of designs on the ground of like a modified hopscotch, where the child would put one left foot in the first place, then they would have to jump with 2 feet, then they'd have to jump with one right foot. What they were learning in this hopscotch game, and there are varieties of ways you can do this, but first of all, they were learning a very important executive function task, which is inhibition. So they would learn to inhibit both feet and to jump with one foot and to jump with the other foot. That's what executive function is all about. That's what teaches kids not to push other kids on the line when they're waiting to put their coats on. That's what is a much better strategy for helping kids to pay attention rather than medicating them for ADD. The other thing that has been done, there's some wonderful work at Lesley College at looking at putting some numbers on these signs on the ground and teaching kids addition and subtraction by moving their body toward different places on the on this pattern of grid on the sidewalk. So lots of opportunities for learning that's fun, that's joyful, that's active, that's outside, and that kids really get a tremendous sense of mastery about. Here's people talk about Monopoly. Well, here's a game that they developed called Parkopolis, that a human-sized board game designed to foster early mathematical skills and scientific reasoning. And the kids actually move their bodies around the board, but they do it also by learning about fractions. So you'll see in another slide how when they spin the wheel and the dice come up with fractions, kids are learning about fractions through this board game. They're taking turns, they're learning how to collaborate, they're learning how to problem solve, and they're playing a game. Again, showed improvements in number language, fraction language, pattern language, critical thinking, creativity, and content in number and in STEM. And this is one of the architects and designers that did this study, Andres Bustamante. This is the fraction dice that they spin the wheel and come up with. You can see the fractions here. That's a half, that's a whole. But again, innovative ways to do this. Now we can talk about libraries as well as children's museums. So the spaces where kids can climb into cubbies and read, places where kids can engage in physical activity, interact with other kids and adults. I mean, the children's museums pioneered this many, many years ago. And this kind of interaction keeps parents off cell phones, allows them to interact with their kids, and is just so critical. So let me see where we are, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. I cut out a bunch of slides because I thought we would run too long, but we're doing okay on time. So I think what we're doing is encouraging guided play in public spaces through architectural design. We're enhancing the other 80% of waking time children spend outside of school. And parents and children can increase behaviors that are brain building skills for language, math, reading, and literacy, but at the same time, really encouraging the joy of learning, which is really what we want to promote in young children for their lifetimes. And we're now working with multiple cities around the country, Santa Ana, California, Venice, Italy, Buenos Aires, Argentina. And each of these cities engages their own community members in figuring out what are their specific needs. So it's a community project. It's not a top-down project. And I think we can encourage all of our communities to model on Philadelphia, which has really become a model city in this dimension. So these are some of the cities that hospitals, by the way, and one of the tragedies, we were designing a study in my pediatric waiting room to look at this as an intervention, and we had all set to go, had the installation set up, had gone through the institutional review board, had hired the staff and trained them. We were ready to start on the day the pandemic started. We had to close our waiting room. But since then, we've had a number of consultations with hospitals, both in Denmark and in Salt Lake City, that are really transforming their hospital settings, where people are often sitting around in waiting rooms, and rather than watching TV, they're able to engage in these playful learning installations. So you can see hospital waiting rooms in Philadelphia, laundromats, housing spaces, housing projects are another venue. But as you know, children's museums have been on this from the get-go, so they are the leaders. Now, let's see. So here we go. We're putting guided play to work. The bench is not just a bench. We can reimagine everyday spaces and infusing them with what we know from the science of learning. We can put guided play to work in the community. And I can refer you to our new website, playfullearninglandscapes.com, where we have a wealth more material about this. And if anybody's interested in references, I think in the Q&A, there were a number of questions about media. And I might just comment about that since I think we're doing pretty well on time. The media issue is complicated because the degree that video games and media encourage kids to be passive, to be solitary, to be on their own, there are lots of downsides to that. Not the least of which is to the degree that kids are sedentary and not exercising, it is part and parcel of the obesity epidemic we're so confronting. But again, learning is an active process. It's not a passive process. And so there certainly are opportunities with online media that encourage collaboration, that encourage kids to collaborate together, that encourage kids and adults to collaborate in problem solving. So I think it's not that media is all good or all bad. It's that it's how the media is used and how it's created. I think to the degree that it doesn't displace family conversations at mealtimes, I think that the other risk of media is obviously it doesn't belong in kids' bedrooms, and it doesn't belong within about a half-hour bedtime because a host of sleep issues occur when kids are using screens either in their rooms or too close to bedtime. And finally, one needs to monitor what happens online because everybody is very aware of the prevalence of cyberbullying and cyber texting that has its own risks for children. So I thought I would just add that to a longer discussion about play, but I'm happy at this point to stop and take questions. So why don't I turn it back to you, Neil?
That's good. Michael, thanks. That was a whirlwind tour of the world of play, and really appreciate the updates on the current work and the current thinking and some of the exciting things you're working on now on this area. So that was terrific. You know, one of our first questions actually goes to some of your current work and about playgrounds and playbraries. You know, are there anything in that would constitute that you would recommend in the Boston area?
Well, I think the best example is the legacy of Martin Richards and the Martin Richards Park. It's been designed so that it's available to all children, including children with disabilities, in honor of Martin and his sister. And it's a marvelous example of lots of opportunities for playful learning. And thanks to a lot of pressure, we pointed out that they better make it climate resilient because it's in a very vulnerable spot right on the seaport. But that's one example. I think we're pushing, I've had some conversations with Mayor Wu and her early childhood task force and her new early childhood coordinator about making Boston one of these resilient cities that models on Philadelphia to make these safe neighborhood playgrounds that have opportunities for playful learning. So there's a lot we can do and advocate for. And I think that all learning doesn't just occur in the four walls of the public schools. And I think there's a lot that I think Boston has been quite innovative when Jason Sachs is designing the UPK curricula and the curricula in childcare settings, that we really focus on the social emotional interactions and social emotional learning that kids have in childcare spaces. One of the things when I was writing this, I saw some interviews with preschool teachers in Manhattan who were weeping because her director told her she should get rid of the blocks. And God knows that's the last thing that preschools should be getting rid of.
Yeah, so related to that one, making the case for play. One of our audience members says, "What reading could I point my classroom parents to of a play theory school that play is really important? It really is works, and it's totally not something that the teacher is making up. That the importance of play." A simple reading for parents is what they were looking for.
So, God, there's so much. I'm trying to think of. One is to go to the Playful Learning Landscapes website. I think that probably has a lot of good information for parents. I have a whole reference list appended to this paper, but it's more, academic papers and things of that nature that are not as pertinent to the question. But I think the playfullearninglandscapes.com will have a lot of useful resources for parents. That's probably the best, the most efficient resource. And I was going to point out that this is something that we all need to advocate for and support. Teachers in childcare settings know in their heart of hearts how valuable this experience is. And the other thing that what I wanted to get to was the importance of these relationships as part of play. That is really, I think that's where the real value comes in as much as anything else. It's that ability, and that's, Ben Franklin once said, out of adversity comes opportunity. And I think as tragic as this pandemic has been, if parents had the opportunity to be home more with their kids and to have some joyful relationship time, that was probably the most antidote to the stress of the pandemic that they could offer. And I think to really support consistent caregivers in childcare that can have a relationship with the kids, that's the medicine. The medicine is that kind of stable nurturance that kids really depend on.
That's it. That brings up a good point, Michael, that a couple of people raised in their questions, sort of the opposite of that a little bit, and said, and I'll just read the question. Can you talk about children who seek constant playtime with their adults? If I always played with them, I'd never cook, I'd never do laundry or anything else. What's the best way to limit playtime but keep it meaningful?
So that's where I think, particularly here at cooking. So giving your child, while you're cooking, the wooden spoons, the plastic spoons, the Tupperware, those are the things that they love. They love to mimic what you're doing, and it doesn't have to distract from what you need to do. But it, turn this off my phone. But that I think is and I think that as with everything else with kids, there's what's the word? Moderation in all things, so that you do need to set some limits. And one of the ways to do it, I'll often talk about this when people are bringing home a new sibling, a newborn and have an older child who's used to having the parents hold themselves. And I'll say, well, they're going to be very upset about the fact that they don't have exclusive access to mommy anymore. And what you got to do is set some limits and say, look, we'll have someone take care of the baby at 6 p.m. in the evening, and we'll have our special sacrosanct time for you at that time, but you got to wait. And then you play it up for all it's worth. And kids are remarkably resilient when they have that kind of expectation. Know they're going to have some special time with you, and they can live with that. And I think you need to set reasonable expectations and limits, and know, although play is valuable, it's not 24 hours a day.
Yeah. Limits is a pretty useful tactic in a lot of situations, right? So we had a couple of questions, Michael, from folks who are parenting neurodiverse kids or kids on the spectrum, asking, how do I create play interest for a kid on the spectrum of a parent when the kid, so boredom sets in so easily and they lose interest in things so quickly.
Yeah, so those are really challenging issues to deal with, but I do have some suggestions. And I think, again, every child is an individual, and understanding the individual preferences of your child can go a long way toward helping. And I found with many of kids on the spectrum that they may be very sensitive to touch, but they're very receptive to music, to rhythm, to dance. And I think if you over time, as you come to understand what kinds of modalities of sensory input your child really cottons to, that can be very helpful. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be easy, and you need to work with the special services, the ABA services, and other special interventions that have really been shown to be very helpful to improving outcomes in these children. But I think you go with, you think outside the box about the fact that these children still will display many aspects of normal development if you can find a way to reach them and to communicate. And it's often not with language, and it may not be with touch, but it may be with music, with rhythm, with other kinds of activities. And that's what you kind of individually figure out with each child.
So it's about, trying different things and finding the thing.
Finding the right fit.
Yeah, that's helpful. There were a number of folks who raised questions around stress, and I'm sure you're seeing this in your practice with the amount of stress that kids are feeling. One parent asks, how does a parent identify if their child is undergoing stress that may or may not be causing a speech delay? A very specific question.
Yeah. So, speech delays are multifactorial, and stress is one possibility, but there are many others. You want to make sure their hearing is okay, and there are just other things. So that certainly warrants a discussion with your pediatrician about why your child's language is delayed. But on the broader issue of stress, and the pandemic has certainly been a huge stress, I think people have often moved from physical isolation to social isolation. And social isolation, we are, as human beings, we are not meant to be socially isolated. And that connection, I think, has been the most harmful aspect. That lack of connection has been the most harmful aspect of the pandemic. So thank goodness we're now realizing that we need to get kids back in school, and back in childcare, and back in children's museums. We can do it safely. I actually am a big proponent for younger kids who aren't vaccinated of having them continue to wear masks whenever possible. But I think the But the issue of stress, again, comes back to, I think this is where play is really important, and play because of the way it facilitates a relationship. So if your child is stressed, and there are so many reasons for stress, not, including trauma, various events of upheavals in family life. But we know that when children feel cared for, when they feel like they can turn to their parents for comfort, for hugs, when they can have that kind of consistent expectation that when they're in need, they can get a hug. For older kids, they can talk to their parents, the communication is open and not just judgmental. That's the antidote to stress. And the kind of executive function skills that play facilitates is also part of that solution. So it gives kids the skills to think outside the box in terms of problem solving, in terms of collaborating and communicating. So those are key pieces. And there comes a point of stress that, unfortunately I'm seeing more and more when kids need, some professional help. And counseling can go a long way toward helping kids develop coping strategies to deal with stress. Now, a certain amount of stress facilitates those kinds of coping strategies. There's what we call tolerable stress. There's the normal stress of everyday life, getting up early in the morning and going to work. But there's tolerable stress, bad things happen, but supportive families help kids get through it. But when stress is repetitive, overwhelming, and unbuffered by that kind of supportive relationship, that's when we really have problems. When that stress gets internalized and changes the biology of the brain, of the immune system, of the inflammatory markers, those are kids that need more intensive help and more intensive counseling. And we need and this is where I've been advocating a lot, we need a mental health system that is much more accessible, where mental health providers are much more covered by insurance, and people can access that system and get the help they need without having to go to emergency rooms and be stuck for days on end. So we're working intensively with the legislature and with the health insurers to fix the problem of an inadequate mental health workforce.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a somewhat overwhelming situation.
Yeah.
So many pediatricians in that boat.
The pandemic has just made it. That's really what we're spending our time doing.
I know from past conversations that we've had, a lot of parents struggle with trying to understand and interpret when their child needs more help than they can deliver themselves. I don't know if you have any insight about what the sort of indicators of, you need to seek additional care might be.
Well, one of the things that we use are you look at the basics. Is your child eating? Is your child sleeping? What's your child like at home? But you also want to look at what your child is like in other settings. When they're struggling in school, when they're struggling in childcare, when they're struggling with no friends, when they're hiding in their room on social media, those are red flags that you need to call for more help.
Right.
And don't hold back. There's no stigma. I would say 75% of the kids that I see these days with the pandemic need that kind of extra support, and we need to make it available to them. It's just part and parcel of caring for whole children and raising a healthy generation.
Yeah, one parent actually raised a very pretty specific question, which I'll read to you. It says, "My 4-year-old has started biting and sucking his lower lips since last September. It was stressful for him, and it's because he had just started school using a new language, and wearing masks isn't helping. At first, we just reminded him here and there and invited him to sip water so that he could get a chance to release his biting habit. However, such habits don't go away but get worse. Now he would suck his lips unconsciously and bite hard whenever he's in a stressful situation. So this person is saying, help. Yeah, I mean, do you have any insight about that? I know you're
Well, it's
doing.
a tough, it sounds like a very stressed child. And I think that I'm sure they've tried many of the obvious things, which is distractions, using things like Greek worry beads, a squeeze ball, a blanket, a transitional object. I'm not sure what it's a 4-year-old. So, but I think some of those things can be very helpful. Again, providing some special time, some conversations with the child about trying to figure out what they are stressed about, and if there's anything the parents can have cover. But it may be at some point, if they can't kind of get to the underlying issues, that the child may need some play sessions with the counselor to uncover that and get the kind of relief that they're seeking.
Right. Now, I know you talked a little bit about the different types of play and didn't really talk a lot about games as a play, but one person had a question about that, which was in my house, the play often ends with tantrums when kids cannot accept that they didn't win. Any suggestions on how to help kids handle losing a game?
Well, that is a really important skill. So I wouldn't give up, because that's the goal of games. Jane Goodall has a wonderful example of how animals learn to engage in rough and tumble play. And what they learn is that you can play without getting hurt. And it enables them to manage predators. And I think if we use that model, board games are critical for kids to learn to share, to collaborate. And there are a variety of games that do this. But starting way back with something like Simon Says, where kids can learn, this is a critical executive function skill, where they learn to inhibit different activities. Well, learning to lose is learning to inhibit having a temper tantrum when you don't get your way. And that's life. And the sooner you learn it, the better. So that I think that I wouldn't shy away from kind of challenging, but from continuing to do board games and from using it as an opportunity to teach your child a really important skill that'll be critical for the rest of their lives.
I hesitate to say this one just because I see my staff already grimacing at me, but there was a great article that George Packer just wrote in the Atlantic on schools and democracy. And he wrote, a functioning democracy knows citizens who know how to make decisions together, right? And those skills of being able to negotiate and problem solve and lose and win sometimes on either way. And that's a critical life skill that we're all dependent on it. So it sort of points out that the importance of play, as you're talking about, is when we're all going to develop the skills that are going to make us, better adults. I think that's.
Yeah, I love that George Packer article, and David Brooks has been all over this in the last few years. He's been has a project called the Weavers Project, where he's going to specific communities and getting people to connect and work together. And there was a wonderful piece, I think they quoted one of our papers early on about world politics and civil discourse in this country, that God, if we don't learn how to talk civilly to each other and work together, we're really putting our democracy at risk. And that's probably our biggest challenge. And God knows we got to teach our kids how to work together and how to collaborate and how to talk kindly to each other.
Those are all skills
that's what play is all about.
That's what play is all about, exactly. So anybody who thinks that play is just play, You know,
It ain't frivolous. It
is
matters.
frivolous. That's great. So this message of play, Michael, one question that came out that, early on in about sort of what are the barriers here? The question is, what is the biggest barrier to children engaging in play-based learning? Is it societal values? Is it adult priorities? Is it lack of opportunity? Like, what's the big nut in the way here?
Well, I think that it's different things for different people. I think for some communities, we talk about the importance of kids being outdoors, and looking at leaves, collecting toads, collecting frogs, looking at insects. For some kids, they don't have the opportunity to go outside safely. They don't have safe neighborhood playgrounds. So that's one challenge. And I think there's something in the chat about cities that want to bring learning landscapes into their area for funding options. I think somebody mentioned Martin's Park. So I think that's one thing. I think we need to encourage all communities to create safe places for kids to play. I think that the other challenge, I think we are on a little bit like, I forget the term, the hamster wheel, that adults think the more enrichment activities for their kids, the more likely they are to get in the elite college. And I mean, look at what happened with this varsity blues scandal. What is wrong with these parents that they somehow think that that's the solution for their kids' success? What kind of values are those? I think that we have to realize that what we want for our kids is for them to have strong values, to have kind of feel curious about the world, to be good citizens, and that doesn't require them to have every minute of their time scheduled with an activity. There's nothing wrong with kids being a little bored at times and having to rely on their own resources to figure things out, to think about things, to think about creative solutions to things. So I think there's that disconnect between being overscheduled and that pressure from parents for hyper academic success. Nobody wants kids to fail. Nobody wants kids not to be literate and to be academically successful. But I think there are limits to how much pressure we want to put on kids to kind of lose the joy of learning. Ultimately, if they're not going to be curious and not going to be interested in learning, we're not doing them a favor over the long term.
Well, that might be a good place for us to rest for the evening, Michael. I mean, that the conclusion you're saying there of just letting kids be kids is probably a good summarizing point for tonight. There, we could take people's questions for hours and hours based on this, but I wanted to thank you again on behalf of the audience. Remind everybody that we'll be making this available. We'll work with Dr. Yogman to, if there are references and things that we can attach when we send out the video, to make those all available to people. And we really appreciate the work you're doing. It's exciting to see, emphasis being put on creating great places for kids to play. And
that's what you're doing every day.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll encourage the audience to show up for another speaker series event in the future. And Michael, it's good to see you, and take care.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.